The US-Israel conflict is dragging on, and peace talk not looking too promising. So here's the big question. How prepared are countries for an oil shock? Let's break it down. First, why is everyone worried about the Strait of Hormuz? Because this narrow waterway is one of the most important energy choke points in the world. Every day, approximately 20 million barrels of oil and petroleum products, also 88 million tons of LNG pass through it. Tons. That's roughly 20% of global oil and gas trade. Now imagine that flow getting disrupted. Imagine that. Oil prices rise, shipping costs increase, and countries that depend heavily on imports begin to feel the pressure. So who's most affected? The answer is simple. Asia! Around 84% of crude oil and 83% of LNG transported through the Strait of Hormuz is destined for Asian countries. In 2024 alone, about 14.3 million barrels of crude oil and 10.4 billion cubic feet of LNG flowed through the strait per day. A disruption here doesn't just affect one country, it affects an entire region. As tensions rise, many countries have already started preparing for possible shortage. Countries such as India, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines have introduced fuel rationing measures to reduce pressure on fuel supplies and control sudden increase in oil prices. Because when supply becomes uncertain, every barrel matters. But some countries have another line of defense, their emergency reserve, or known as SPR. What is SPR, you may ask? SPR stands for Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It's an emergency stockpile of crude oil stored by the government for major crises such as wars, supply disruption, or energy emergencies. Think of it as a country's emergency fuel saving accounts. Now let's talk about the countries with the biggest reserve. China is believed to have more than 1.4 billion barrels of oil reserve across strategic storage, commercial inventories, and underground facilities. Even during recent tensions, China largely left its strategic petroleum reserve untouched. Instead, it restricted exports of refined petroleum products to protect domestic supply. But what are refined petroleum products? Good question. Crude oil isn't very useful on its own. It must first be processed in a refinery. After refining, it becomes petrol for cars, diesel for trucks and buses, jet fuel for aircraft, LPG cooking gas, industrial fuels and lubricants. So when a country restricts refined petroleum export, it is essentially keeping more fuel at home. While China isn't the only country preparing, let's compare some major oil stockpiles. I hope you understand the graph. So let's continue. When measured by import coverage, Japan can sustain approximately 250 days of net crude imports, while the United States can cover about 200 days, the UK about 90, and China more than 100. That's a significant buffer during a crisis. What about Asian countries? The level of preparedness varies. Countries such as Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam have official oil and gas stockpiling policies. Meanwhile, countries such as Malaysia and Singapore rely heavily on mandatory private stockholding requirements. Singapore maintains around 19 days of mandatory private stocks, one of the highest level in Southeast Asia. Malaysia, on the other hand, maintains around 30 days. But oil isn't the only thing at risk here. A closure of the Strait of Hormuz would affect many industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, technology, and even global supply chain. And here's the worrying part. Experts believe three major risks could emerge. Number one, countries compete aggressively for scarce resource because global supply chain are being disrupted here. Number two, critical infrastructure damage during conflict. It could take years to rebuild. And number three, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait could become a second major choke point, making the situation even worse. So, how prepared are countries for an oil shock? Some nations have built massive reserves, others have developed emergency stockpiling policies, but countries that depend heavily on imported energy remain vulnerable. Because in a world where supply routes can be disrupted overnight, having oil is important, having a strategy is even more important, and when it comes to energy, security, preparation today determines resilience tomorrow. Yeah, so that's about it.